Here we go. Okay, so welcome again. We are recording now. So in the chat, if you could just put in your name, first, last name, and where you're coming from. A lot of
Condos, Cerritos, West LA College. Welcome. Orange Coast Community College. Bakersfield, that's where my family's from. Awesome. We're excited to have all of you here.
So we wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is Ernestina Aguilar. I'm the current principal at Tesoro Elementary School in Saugus. And I will let you, my co-partner, introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Daria Ramirez, and I'm the proud principal of Old Orchard Elementary School. We are a dual language school in the Newhall School District, and we're both excited to be here today to present to you about how to amplify student voices in the K-6 classrooms.
So here we would like to start off with a check-in. So how are you showing up in this space today? Using this blob character, describe how you are feeling today. And there's no judgment. It's a safe place. So write your number and maybe 2 words that describe your feelings. And we'll model that for you. Today, I think I'm feeling kind of like number 4. I'm just ready to take it on and, making the best of it. How about you, Mrs. Ramirez?
I was definitely feeling a 1 today. We had a lot of things going on at the same time, so I was hanging on. But right now, I'm at 11, 12 because I have my co-partner here to present with, so I'm in a better place now.
Great. So we have a 10 or a 20. We have a 5. Super tired. We feel you. Very good. So this is something that you can use in your classrooms right away to start initiating that response from students, checking in with them. How are you showing up to class today? It will tell you in a safe way where they're at and where to meet them. So just a few norms: be present, cameras on if you choose and you're comfortable with being recorded. If not, we totally understand. And be open. And the reasons we put these norms in, or ZORMs, is because this is where it starts. We put the parameters on student voices, starting from kindergarten all the way to 6th grade, right? So if you notice, it says we want your voice and thoughts and ideas. And so if that's going to be a priority in our classrooms, it needs to be a norm where students feel like they can share their voice. When we talk about being open, what does that really mean to a kindergarten, right? Or a 1st grader? So we have to really intentionally define, what does take risking mean? That's part of being open. If I'm going to be open, I'm going to be vulnerable. What am I going to feel? How am I going to deal with that? So these are important things that we always just put out as protocol sometimes, but we don't unpack. And so it's really important to really go through and unpack these important elements of how are we showing up in this space. So today we have 3 really quick objectives in 1 hour. And we are going to give you some time to just engage with us. And if we don't get to all the presentation, we will adjust as we can to make sure that you get what we intended for this presentation to be. So first of all, we want to make sure that we engage you in strategies to really enhance that teacher-student relationships. We know that we're teaching or preaching to the choir. We're talking, you're showing up at 4:30 on a Tuesday because we all want to grow ourselves as practitioners. So we know that teacher-student relationships are important. So we want to expand on your expertise. And we're also, we're going to touch very, very at a surface level about self-awareness, self-worth, because you can have a whole professional development on just that. But how does that relate to voice specifically? And then the last thing that we want to just give is some instructional practices that are things that you can implement tomorrow, right? Because I think oftentimes as teachers, we go to these professional developments or these workshops, and there's so many things that we don't know how to go back and use. So what we'd like you to just go away with are a few things that you can use in your classrooms. So here we go with our first discussion.
So we're going to start off with we want to unpack some of our own beliefs and experiences when it comes to student voice. We know that our practice and our actions typically stem from our own experiences and, as a child, as educators. So really quickly, take a moment to think and reflect, who was your favorite teacher? Why was that your favorite teacher? I know I can go as early as kindergarten all the way through high school and into college, and I can tell you which teachers helped develop my voice and which teachers silenced my voice. So just take a moment to think, who was your favorite teacher and why? And now as adults, when you think about times when you've been called on to use your voice, how has that made you feel? Are there certain situations that make you feel more comfortable than others? And then do all the other situations create that fear and anxiety? Our students go through that same roller coaster of emotions. And if we fast forward to our current role as educators, think, who is doing all of the talking in the classroom? Which voices are being pushed out? How are we elevating student voices in the classroom? Is the teacher doing all of the talking? Research does say that whoever's doing all the talking is doing all the learning. Even in classrooms that have that healthy debate, students are often, they take on the role of passive collaborators, and we want to move away from that because we want them to have an active role in their learning. So just a few questions to think about as we continue on to the next slide. So we want to be able to give you an opportunity to draw from your own experiences. And I'm going to start with this quote here that we see. The three most important words in education are relationships, 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 from George Couros, who reminds us that without relationships, we really have nothing. So taking a moment to ask ourselves, how are we building those authentic relationships? Because before we can amplify student voices, we have to make sure that we're building those authentic relationships with our students. So just taking a moment with reflecting on our practice, how is it that we're welcoming our students when they enter the classroom? This could be virtual or physically. I know some of, we are back in person, but even when our teachers were teaching virtually, they took the time to greet every single student, and the student took the time to unmute themselves and greet the teacher. But really taking that time to welcome every child into the classroom, because for some of them, that might be the only opportunity throughout the entire day that they were acknowledged and that their voice was used. Also, what is it that you know about your students? Do you know anything about their community, their neighborhood, anything about their families? And what do your students know about you? Again, those opportunities don't just exist in the classroom. We as teachers and educators have to create the opportunities. So again, do your students know what's expected of them? Do they know what rules change, if the rules change depending on a student? I was at the Q conference, I believe it was a year or two ago, and one of the presenters asked this question: do your students know who you like and don't like? And there was a what in the chat box, but it's true. Our students can pick up on that. So just being very mindful of how we're taking every opportunity in the classroom to build those authentic relationships with our students. Next slide. So just a few opportunities to practice every day in the classroom. So those opening check-ins, again, this can be done virtually or in person. The opening check-ins, I see teachers using the question of the day. Ernestina actually opened it up with that image and letting us know, how are you feeling today? Kindness conversations. We do partner with our school social worker, our counselors, to model what this looks like in staff meetings. If there is an issue that comes up, then we do partner with all of our resources in the school to help engage our teachers in those conversations with students that may be a little bit difficult to navigate. Also, creating an opportunity to have an optimistic closure. And I know now more than ever, our students and our teachers are overloaded. Just creating an opportunity to close out the day on a positive note. And just giving them an opportunity to share, what was something that you learned today? What is something that you were able to do? Were you able to help someone out? And just to, again, give them an opportunity to share out. So just being very mindful of how much talk is dominated by the teacher, and what opportunities are we creating, because they don't just happen. So just making sure that we're being mindful of that. And then also community circles are a great way to bring all of this together. As a classroom teacher, we physically sat in a circle because it ensured that we can all see each other And there's also, creating and establishing those norms with your students that if today they're not feeling like they want to participate or share out, that's okay. But at least you're giving them that option. Renee, did you want to say something or are you agreeing?
I want to just chime in real quick. I'm a big believer in community circles. I have always taken the time to, I believe that's an investment in a classroom. And one quick little strategy, I always think of like Lord of the Rings, but Lord of the Flies. Who's got the conch? Because one of the pieces with the community circle is you want voice to be heard and they can't talk over each other. And so I just grabbed this little like guy I have sitting on my desk, but it's a tangible representation of if you're face to face, whoever has the floor, and kids aren't used to that power. Right. So community circles, it also turns kids into people who can talk in front of groups, which is probably the number one thing that adults are afraid of.
Yes.
But why wouldn't we encourage it? So I love this slide is like so who I am as an educator. So yeah, it's like a whoop whoop, and it's also
absolutely.
Fun to chime in.
Thank you so much for chiming in, Renee. We appreciate that. But absolutely, and it has to start day one. You have to invest in these types of opportunities because this is really how students build that self-awareness. This is how we also focus on our students' social emotional well-being. And if you're not too comfortable navigating these conversations, again, partner with another teacher who absolutely, like Renee, if you and I were at the same school, I'm gonna be like, Renee, come into my classroom. Let's, if this isn't something that you're comfortable with, there are other people at your site that are social worker, again, counselors that can help facilitate this with you. And then over time, your kids become the facilitators, and that's what you want. You want to build that, empower your students to be able to lead the discussions. When I taught sixth grade, I actually allowed my students to come up with the topics for our community circles, and they loved it because they put a lot of thought into that. And again, it gave them that sense of empowerment of this is something I'm going to lead. I was blown away by the end of the year when I had students who day one did not say a word, and by the end of the school year, they were the ones that were facilitating those circles. So definitely something to invest in. Next slide.
So I just wanted to pause for a minute because I want to invite you to engage in the chat. If there is something like Renee say, like a woot woot, like, yes, I got that. Go ahead and write it in there because this is a conversation and unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, but we'd like to hear your thoughts where you're at. If you're doing something, if you want to share an idea that goes along with it, that adds to the conversation, please just put it in the chat because that's where our wealth of our expertise grows from each other. So I wanted to just introduce this activity. It goes along the same way of those check-ins, right? Or closures. So it's an activity that you just initiates conversation at any level, K6. And so we want to talk about something positive that happened or a celebration, right? Or we might end up talking about something that really we need to get that the thorn might be that something that we didn't go well today. Sometimes I think we focus on all the positive and we kind of shy away from those negative emotions, and we need to embrace those as well because that's how we become balanced adults, when we are able to navigate both in the positive and in the struggles. And a lot of the times we're told like it doesn't feel good to not feel good, and so this is just a very safe way to talk about those unsettling feelings or what's something that you're really looking forward to. So this is just an activity that we can embrace in our classrooms. Chalk Talk is out there. So it's another activity that will get into the thoughts and ideas of students. So looking at this, we want to get past, the surface level, right? We typically don't offer enough time for think time when we're asking questions or when we're dialoguing sometimes. And so this is a good way to put an essential question on the board or on, the butcher paper and really give students time to process, write down what they think about it without judgment, and then other students, other peers kind of add to those ideas or disagree. but it's all done in silence so that we can actually process and read and respond in writing, which are things that, you know, sometimes because we're short on time, we don't give our students that think time and that process time. So that's something to kind of, that's another activity.
This also, Ernestina, reminds me, like for our students, especially at the beginning of the year, who are still trying to get a feel for what is our classroom, you know, culture and environment going to look like. They're still testing the water. This is such a non-threatening way for students to have another opportunity for their voice to be, you know, read. It might not be heard, but we can read your voice and your thoughts and ideas. So another great opportunity for, I think sometimes we tend to, we only rely on the oral responses of our students, but their writing is another opportunity for show how powerful their voice can be.
Absolutely. The hashtag is something that really goes with the times, you know, which students can come up with some great hashtags, and they can really solidify that knowledge and that expertise and bring it out. And so it's another way to voice their thoughts. And I think with hashtags, you kind of put passion into it because you have to be very deliberate on what words you are going to choose and share out in a public space. So that's really important. Also, World Cafe is just simply rotating students from table to table, but really having a discussion around an essential question, and then students record their conversations. This in a virtual space can be done through like a Jamboard, right? So you set up 3 frames on a Jamboard, and then students get into breakout rooms, and you would go through each one of the frames and then discuss an essential question that is important and relevant to the students or to the curriculum, or however we're organizing that. We would model that, but for the sake of time, we're just gonna move forward, but that would be World Cafe. Let's see. So here's another one. I actually shared this with my staff at the beginning of the year, and it's still going strong. Tell me about it Tuesday. So every Tuesday, the teacher intentionally talks about making mistakes, and they talk about their favorite mistake, which is very, you know, unique in its own creation. And so it's just another touch point that's very intentional and deliberate to have those conversations with students.
Yeah, Renee, did you want to add on to
Right.
that?
I'm sorry I'm chiming in again, but
No,
I had a
please
favorite
do.
mistake yesterday, and it was so stressful as it was happening. We had our colleagues from CalSTRS, and they were on their session, but all their attendees were somehow in this other room, and it took 24 minutes to troubleshoot a 1-hour session. But then here's what happened. This is why it's my favorite mistake. We ended up troubleshooting. We opened up a new room, and everyone came over. 43 people stayed with us for 24 minutes during a technology challenge. And it was like, so afterwards, even though it was so stressful as it was happening, afterwards, it was like, I felt pride in the mistake. And that was a weird feeling, but like, I see people in the chat are like, I was totally on that one. And we did it together.
Yes.
We made it. And then the presentation was so worth it. So
Yeah.
I love that you're talking about this concept of a favorite mistake.
Yeah.
We're always in the deficit model. And what you're doing here is you are presenting an asset model of education. That's what this is. Brilliant, ladies. Brilliant.
Yeah, and think about what message that is sending to our students when we celebrate those mistakes and we encourage them to learn from that, and the culture that you're developing in your classrooms too. So just all of these, you know, these are the opportunities that we have to create for our students, because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah, and just to add on that, how many times do students have the opportunity to talk about mistakes even when they go home, right, with their families? If they're lucky, they might, but a lot of the times, and it might be cultural too, depending, right, on what kind of culture they go home to. But, and I'm not talking about, you know, it's just the expectations. Sometimes we don't want to talk about things that we made a mistake on, right? It doesn't feel good. So yes, definitely an important topic. This is another strategy that could be used with any picture. So you can replace this. It's intentionally blurry and intentionally not very clear, because we want to see the dialogue that evolves from a picture, right?
Yeah.
So you use the sentence frame, I notice, which makes me think. So I notice there is a lot of dark colors, which makes me think that there's somebody may be in trouble, right? And so it's kind of putting your thoughts together so that you're able and prepared to share it when it's time to share. It's really important to acknowledge the space between the voice and the stimulus. And I think that's where sometimes students struggle. They need a lot of support in constructing their thoughts so they feel competent when they stand in front of just a teacher or their peers or anyone else and feel confident in what they're going to share, because it's a vulnerable position to be in when you're asked about what you know or what you think, and it's not very clear.
And pictures are so, like, you can pull anything. I had a teacher, I walked into a classroom this morning, first grade, she had an old calendar, posted the picture, it was a cat in a sink, we had no idea, but the conversation, the questions that kids came up with, again, it's about creating those opportunities and just taking a moment to, you know what, we need a mental break. And it doesn't always have to be a go noodle. It's let's get some ideas out. Here's a picture. What do you see? I noticed, which makes me think. I have some questions. What questions do you have? Why did the artist, use those colors? So it works TK to 6th grade. We see it in all classrooms. Don't be afraid to bust out those old calendars because honestly, you can use anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here again, just to focus again on the teacher-student relationships, teacher empathy. This honestly reminds me of Rita Pearson, one of my favorite videos. Children don't learn from people they don't like. And it's absolutely true. How do students seek those connections with you? Is there an opportunity for the students to connect with you? That unconditional positive regard. How do your students know that you care about them as people? And then also elevating student status. Is there an opportunity? Are you creating those opportunities for student status, for their status to be elevated, or for others to elevate their status? This afternoon, I had a student in my office, and I have to share this because the teacher was texting, the student needs a break, the student needs a break. So I brought him into my office, and we just had a conversation. But his response was just so telling. I said, hey, bud, what's going on? And he just says, how does she expect me to learn if she's always sending me out of the classroom? Mm-hmm. And what message is that sending to other kids? Because he says, the kids know why I'm leaving the room. So again, that conversation. So now I have to obviously, take his perception, his feedback, and share that with the teacher. But it's about how are us as educators, do we, what message are we sending to students, and how are we creating those opportunities to connect with them? Because kids do not forget how we make them feel. So just keep that in mind as we're building those student relationships. And every day is an opportunity to start over again. We might have had a rough day today, but tomorrow, and that's what I told him, hey, bud, we're going to try again tomorrow. What happened today, we can learn from it, but tomorrow's a new day.
Absolutely. And this is just an example of that unconditional positive regard. So this was actually this week. I got a note back from a parent that I just, I sent out a handwritten note and acknowledged her daughter specifically for something she did at school. And it was intentional, right? But this could be done among students as well. You can hand a slip to a slip of paper to a student and write a quote or a word on it, and then they can exchange quotes and really build on making connections with each other and seeing where they resonate with that quote or having that written part with it. What the thing that where voice is in this is that now, and I've gotten this from a different parents, they email me back and they say, he's sitting up a little bit straighter now because there is this sense of genuine interest in him, and so it just builds them from the inside. And there are times when the kids will come to me when I'm at recess or lunch and they're like, thank you so much for X, Y, and Z. So they're using their voice to express gratitude or to express that feeling, that good feeling that they did. So it's just a little tiny thing for somebody, but for somebody like a child, it could mean something that can really empower them as individuals of their worth and their value in a school setting.
And Mari, I agree. You're mentioning how your previous employer had you do positive affirmations, and that honestly, we do it with our staff too, because especially so this week, Teacher Staff Appreciation Week. Thank you to all of our educators for all that you do, but who doesn't love this week where you get that opportunity to feel so loved and acknowledged by your students? And it's just, you're right. We could all use those positive affirmations. So thank you for sharing, Mari.
So here's the heart of what we're talking about. We really want to, when you talk about student voice, it's defined differently at every level. So if you're talking about student voice in the university level, at college level, right? But we want to define student voice here at K-6 level because we believe and we're passionate about the power of teachers and what they can do to really support that and expand that and amplify that. So we want to be very deliberate in defining student voice. And so what we want to do is we want you to participate in the chat and write down, how does student voice show up in your classroom? It could be in any shape, any way, any example that you can share with us.
Today? Was there an opportunity today for student voice to be amplified in your room?
So if we can have a few of you share in the chat.
I'm going to put something controversial in the chat. Because sometimes students are craving to get voice through challenging behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially this time of the semester and this time of the year.
Yeah.
And if it's like true. 6th grade or they're the highest grade level, everybody knows.
Were you here today, Renee, by any chance? With the revolving door? All behavior is communication. Yes. Yep. So I work in the classroom with students who are nonverbal. A smile says it all. Yep. Let's not forget those nonverbal forms of communication as well. Yeah.
Very good. So here is what we decided how we were going to define student voice, at least in what our experience and what we want to get across, is that student voice really translates into the talk that involves conversing, discussing, debating, and dialoguing, which really increases the student's brain power so that they're able to take on that rigorous work and really engage in that deeper learning that we all, us teachers, go after each and every day. So there's really a need to support these robust structures that we all know that students need so that they can build their conversations confidently. This is especially true with our English learners, with our introverted students, with our disengaged students, with students with disabilities, or students who have been historically marginalized in other ways. So their funds of knowledge, we all know they don't come as empty vessels, right? But the funds of knowledge that these types of students come with, sometimes and most often, they don't translate into the academic realm. So here we're translating into, or crossing that bridge into this academic realm that has all these high expectations on how to speak and share ideas out loud. So it's really important that we move beyond what our current structures are. And we do the AB partner, that's good practice. We do the think, pair, share, that's good practice. But what we're saying here in this presentation is that we need deeper discussions and we need structures that really foster that deeper discussion. So here is a spectrum of how the student voices kind of expand through. So we have the expressions where we have simple, they just answer questions, very minimal. Then they go into like offering their opinions, and then they move forward and they they participate and they take part in small groups or as a whole class. And we all know that this is not a linear process, right? It can all go in every which way because language is not a linear process. But this is how typically voices evolve. And then they might get enough courage and then start having that be able to teach others. That's a partnership, and create together and collaborate with others. Do you see all the CCCs for the Common Core, right? But then here's the next level, the activism, right? They start generating solutions. They start solving real life problems. And ultimately, where we really want to move these kids is to a leadership. How can they guide activities? Can they make decisions with others and accept responsibility for their outcomes? So if we look at this whole spectrum, 1 and 2, they're teacher-centered. 3 and 4, they're learner-centered. But really, 5 and 6, they're learner-driven. That's empowerment. Getting kids to 5 and 6, that's empowerment. So if we just look at this, right, where would you kind of reflect on, where do you see your class, your students as a whole? What level are they at? And where do we want to get them to, right? So it's just a lot of packed skills that go with every single part of the spectrum. So how do we support our student voices? How do students begin discovering those voices, right? And we talked a lot about relationships. Yes. And that's important because we need validation. They need validation as learners and as independent learners, right? Not the dependent learners that are waiting to answer because they know what the teacher wants to hear. But we want the independent learners that can create their thoughts and contribute to a conversation using their own voice. So we wanted to go really quickly, just touch on self-worth. Again, you can do a whole PD on self-worth and how that's related to voice. But today, we just want to call it out. We know that identity is really intertwined with self-worth, and our culture and our experiences feed into that. And also the expectations, not only of society, but the expectations in the school and the expectations in the classroom also contribute to how I feel and how, how productive I am, and how, and the perceptions of others on us really contribute to that self-worth. I'm working on a dissertation on Latinas self-concept, and it's just over and over and over on the research. Everybody's perception is just so engraved in us from the minute we step out into society, even in our families. When we start having these relationships, they all tell us who we need to be, what we need to be like. And so we feel that that voice is really coming from how you believe to be. So what we're trying to say here is that we need to create this sense that you belong here. You are part of our family. You're a part of our culture. We have the same expectations for you. And we believe you're a valuable person, or, a valuable member of our class, of our society. And that will amplify that voice.
One of my favorite activities as a classroom teacher, I remember reading the story, and you guys might be familiar with it, is My Name is Maria Isabel. And reading that with my 3rd graders, but then taking that, a step further and asking the students to go home and interview their parents. And some of you might already do this. What's the story behind your name? Some of our students have no clue why they have, 4 names, 3 last names, or where their name came from. And then they come back and they share these incredible stories that they had no idea. Some of our students do, because the parents do share that. Other parents, students would share, like, I had no idea that I was named after this person and this person in my family. So just even a simple activity as that to help develop their sense of identity and to give them that opportunity to share their story so that you can continue to build on that community of learners in your classroom. So here, poetry is another incredible opportunity to build student voices, and Ernestina is going to share. It's a poem that she's actually shared with her staff, and she's going to pull it up right now.
Okay, so this is called Brave Space. And so as you listen to it, I'd like to encourage you to listen for where does voice play in this, right? So here we go.
Together, we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that have to fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be. But it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side.
So, so in the chat, what resonated with you from that poem? It's a minute and something. So what resonated with you in that?
And I've seen, just as I walk into different classrooms, how teachers have created their own norms for learning and creating that community of learners in their classroom. And some of the classrooms we have, the mantra is, in this classroom, we expect mistakes, we inspect mistakes, and we respect mistakes, because it's a learning opportunity. So again, using this, and I can see how this poem can easily be tweaked so that your students develop their own mantra for their classroom when they walk in every day. And I don't know if some of you already have that in place, but it's just a good practice to have in how you're going to set your students up for success, establish your norms for learning for the day, reviewing that. Here we said there wasn't a safe space. I remember when they use that phrase a lot. When it becomes unsafe, the trust is broken. Yeah, a brave space is very empowering, and that is what you want. Is your classroom, how can we set it up not to be so much a safe space, but a brave space where everyone does feel empowered to speak up?
Yeah, and I think the thing that is underlying this is the risk taking. If we're going to be brave, it implies that there has to be some risk on all parts. And I think when we come up with these, right, together as a classroom community, we talk about that. And that's where our trust also starts building. And that leads us, we had an activity for you, which we're gonna just skip for the sake of time. But with that poem, what you could do is we set up a Padlet and we put that poem on there, and then the students could, or you can choose any other poem, and students will just take what resonates with them and show their thoughts by using words or pictures, and then you put them into groups and then they dialogue about what that means. And the power of poems is that these ideas generate that you're like, yes, wow, I didn't even see that, right? So it's just powerful language, and it's rich language that's not common or heard a lot in our traditional spaces or even at home, right? So this is an opportunity to really engage in that rich dialogue or that rich vocabulary to include that.
And then just a few ways to amplify student voices. Again, being mindful of, teacher talk and student talk. Are we going on and on and on and not providing those quick opportunities for students to check in and talk to each other? Research does say 10 minutes supports basic comprehension. So if we're going 30, 40 minutes and we're not providing time for students to engage in those conversations, then how much input are they actually receiving? Continuing those small group conversations, you can do partner talk. You can put students in groups of 3 to 4. And I know, when we all went into this pandemic and we went to virtual teaching initially in the spring, we're like, how are we going to get our students to talk? And even now, as we're walking into the classrooms, our students have only been back for a couple of weeks, but they're just now getting into that routine. I remember walking in day one and our classrooms were silent because they were silent for so long, and they knew that they could just hit mute or and that was kind of their escape. They didn't have to participate, but now that they're in the classroom, is creating those opportunities for them to engage in those conversations. And then also, don't assume that our students know what the protocols are. Reminding them, especially for our younger students, reminding them about those rules and protocols. And then also giving them an opportunity to have relevant conversations about things that are going on in the real world. Whether it's, they've been on mute for so long, it's true. And then also learn to let go. If things didn't go a certain way, that doesn't mean that we're just going to give up and, okay, that didn't work. And I've had this conversation with teachers, like, it didn't go as planned. And this is why I don't let them go out into their groups. So what? Let it go. Kids just need that time to practice. So if we go into the next slide, I've had teachers tell me, what is that one magic strategy that I can do to get my students to speak? And it's not the magic or power behind the strategy. The power comes with practice. Practice, practice, practice. Patience, obviously, as educators, we want things to go a certain way, but you need to be flexible. And that's something that we know as educators, we're all flexible. But having that patience and letting go and knowing that with time and practice and rehearsal, we cannot expect our students to engage in academic conversations if we're not giving them the platform to engage in those simple conversations at first. So how do we provide those students an opportunity to rehearse having a conversation? Are we providing them with those sentence stems? If we want them to ask questions, are we modeling that? And then what scaffolds are in place for them to be able to rehearse? And we call it a performance, because really when we're putting the students on the spot and asking them to respond, they really are performing for their peers. So it creates that sense of anxiety. So having those other students in the room model what that looks like. And I see this in classrooms time and time again, that partner talk allows them to gives them that opportunity to practice and rehearse before they have to share out with the rest of the class. And then implementation. If a strategy doesn't work the first time, it doesn't mean we get rid of it. It's just, again, it's the power behind the practice. And then repetition again.
So you just created a new mantra. So what? Let it go. I love it.
Let it go.
Thanks, Sabrina. I love it. You need to put a hashtag right there. Okay, so just really briefly about dialogue and instructional conversations. Dialogue, we know that it really taps into the executive functioning of students, right? They need to know how to plan out their conversation, problem solve, negotiate, self-regulate. There's a lot of things that go into just having a dialogue. And so our students, sometimes it's just expected of them, but they really need to go through the process and really experience it. Like if you think about your classroom, do your students know how to hand off a conversation to each other? Or does a conversation have to always go through the teacher, right? So this is the power of changing your role. It is time to change the teacher role to a facilitator role. We need to facilitate learning instead of having these strict parameters about what they can and cannot do. So here are some ingredients for dialogue: asking questions, active listening, really taking those intellectual risks and sharing your ideas, right? The asking questions is the foundation of critical thinking, and they're really the seeds of how we're going to start producing that dialogue. So the best way to have a dialogue is in a circle. I know that right now with COVID, sometimes that's not possible, but I've seen different ways that teachers have been creative of having that dialogue in a community kind of sense. So,
but I just want to highlight that even in, I saw this in kindergarten, and right now that our students are back in person, I saw the teacher model. How do you ask your partner, how are you doing? How was your, did you have, what did you have for breakfast? And the teacher models that, and then the students say, hi, Tomas, good morning. How are you? How was your day? Or they do that at the end of the day too. So again, it's about creating those opportunities for students to know how to engage in those conversations.
And just being able to have these structures always in place, right? These probing questions that students can almost expect them from you. You know that if they ask you something, or you can redirect their thinking, that they are probably going to say, oh, well, if I come to Mrs. Ramirez, she's going to probably ask me to tell her more, right? It adds depth to understanding and to communication. So probing questions are really important just to embed in everything that we do throughout the content areas. These are three, like, let's reflect on things that are happening or not. But the teacher-centric language, sometimes we do things unintentionally as teachers because that's how we were taught, right? And so sometimes we might say, oh, I want to hear about, how I want to hear this, or, show me what you're thinking about. I'm looking for people who, that's very, very teacher-centered. It's about I want to, right? But instead, what we can say is, what are some ideas that you'd like to share? Or here are some questions to consider. So opening up and changing our teacher language so it's not I want to see or I expect, right? And it builds that community. Also reducing the echo talk. Echo talk for teacher, somebody asks comments, right? The student says, the sea levels could rise tomorrow. And the teacher goes, yep, the sea levels could rise tomorrow. Anybody else? So just that echo talk, because we kind of have to validate what they said, but instead just not removing that, not just simply nodding, acknowledging, smiling, making eye contact, and having that conversation kind of keep going into the classroom. So paying really close attention to what students say, acknowledging that, validating that knowledge, but letting it stand on its own as their voice, right? And the last one is just reducing judgment. And like I said, these are just subliminal messages. Sometimes we're not even aware that we do it all the time. But have you ever said, who has a great idea to share? That was such an awesome example, Jake. So instead, we need to shift our words to say, like, who has an idea to share and who has more ideas to share? We need to share all our ideas, because then we can think about things in a variety of possibilities. And just having this sense of it's a community, it's a pool of our thinking and our thoughts, right? And that will contribute to these energizing conversations about all our knowledge pooled together. So those are just some shifts that can happen that have been suggested. So, Ms. Ramirez, we only have 7 minutes.
I know.
That went really fast.
It did. And I want to make sure that we get to our slides on writing, because that's an important piece too. But we did have a debate here. Is student voice the same as student engagement? And we were going to engage you in, we were actually going to put you in breakout rooms. We weren't quite sure. But here's something that a type of structure or protocol that you can put in place with your student. One person shares their opinion. The group will ask clarifying questions for 1 minute, and then for the last minute, another person adds to their original opinion. So extending, adjusting, or supporting that. So it's like a 1-1-1. One person shares for 1 minute, and And it's important to model this because I think sometimes even as adults, we get uncomfortable with the silence, and that's okay. It'll allow your students to know that silence is just an opportunity for you to develop your ideas. So again, one person would share out, one person could ask those probing questions, and then the last person, so that every single person in the group has a role. I'm sharing my ideas, I'm listening, I'm going to ask questions, and then the last one is also listening and kind of recapping what I heard you say was. So this is especially critical in our upper elementary grades, just a quick protocol that you can implement as part of your student talk.
Right, and this is just a quote: we need to hear from kids, listen to their genuine interactions, and allow them to challenge our biases. Sometimes we are not aware of that, and they are great at reminding us. And I think we're gonna just jam through this, Mrs. Ramirez, because this could be like another PD on student engagement.
Absolutely.
So we agree that that student voice is different than student engagement, and this is how. Student engagement involves these three things. They're behavioral, there's a cognitive component, and there's an emotional component. And it's very observable and has different dimensions. And it also has its own continuum of participating, initiating, and ultimately driving their performance. So for the sake of time, we are going to skip the engagement portion, but here is where we transition just briefly into writing, because these are all skills that are braided together. So to gain the skill and voice and voice, student writers need space to hear themselves think. And so through those protocols, we will have these spaces to provide opportunities like this.
And keep in mind, I think we tend to focus again on their oral contributions, but their writing is also such a powerful tool. So also creating opportunities for students to share their voice through their writing. So do we have writers' notebooks in our classrooms? And I highly encourage you, if you haven't done that, there's so many resources and books about writers' notebooks that you can start as early as kindergarten, and obviously add on to that as you move up in the grades. Poetry writing. Gosh, one of my favorite tasks as a teacher was writing a poem to our favorite food. And to this day, I had students that, if I go to Starbucks and they're now Starbucks employees, they'll say, Mr. Ramirez, do you remember that ode to spaghetti that I wrote when I was in your class? It's just an opportunity for students to express themselves in ways that they might feel more comfortable. Photograph writing, infographics. I do have a quick video clip on the next slide to share with you. So this was an impromptu class visit. Our third graders were writing opinion pieces. I happened to walk in, and I just want to quickly share this with you.
You seemed a little nervous at first, am I right? Yeah. But after writing your first speech and sharing it with Mrs. Ramirez, are you more scared or are you more excited to make changes? More excited! And it sounds like you convinced Mrs. Ramirez. She's going to get more jump ropes and find the hula hoops. She's going to look into volleyball for you so that everyone has something to play with at recess. Mrs. Ramirez shared that she wants to read your speeches. So right now, will you put your name and date on all of your papers? Put it in order.
So the reason that clip was so short is because, again, it was not planned. I happened to be in the classroom once when they were just writing opinion writing. I said, hey, can't wait to see what you're writing. The teacher actually gave me the student writing. I then brought all of their opinion pieces back. Their prompt was, how can we improve our playground structures? I wrote back to every single student. And in that video, the kids were so excited because they had received that feedback. She had then given them an opportunity to take a look at my feedback, and the kids were just excited. So even now when they see me, they say, Ms. Ramirez, I did that. We were able to get more hula hoops because you read my writing piece, or you were, I was able to change this for other students. And just, it was such a powerful moment for our students because they had no idea how much power they had in their voice and in their writing. So I just, again, I encourage any administrators or future administrators in the room, every opportunity is an opportunity to amplify our student voices, whether it's orally or in writing. Please take advantage of that opportunity and keep in mind, These opportunities don't just exist. You have to create them.
And just to add on that, the discussions really bridge that gap between the conversation and the composition. So you have to be able to have that conversation and be able to process that, to be able to be able to put that in writing. And the other thing is that, the writing synthesizes really all the multiple perspectives in just ingenious ways when it's structured. We're going to end quickly, but I saw this in the chat and somebody said, how can we make our voices more, or our practice, or our, amplify that inclusiveness, or, word choice, more inclusiveness. It's up there. I didn't get the chat, but I wanted just to touch briefly on the privilege of empowerment, because voice has some privilege that gives kids empowerment. So just the simple fact of how do you question authority? Like, we need to make sure our students feel safe enough that they know how to question authority. I know that I would not, if I ask a question, I would be in big trouble or something else, that coming up from how I was raised. So it's really important that we just structure that and give students permission to do that. Take advantage. How do students know how to take advantage of available resources when it comes to voice? Sometimes they don't even know that they can say that, or that that's something we can ask for. So asking for help, it's something looked upon that's sometimes not looked favorably. If you ask for help, you're looked as weak, or something that you're not strong enough, because clearly you didn't understand it the first time, right? And speaking up in class. Where is the privilege in your classroom? Who are the ones that are speaking up? Like, let's unpack that, because that is so important. And then just really briefly, how well do you know your students? We asked that, right? But these EL learners are disengaged and introverted. Just really briefly, I am an English learner, and I feel so passionate about this because it took one fifth grade teacher that said, I asked with all the courage in my might, I raised my hand in fifth grade and I said, I don't understand this. Can you explain it again? And she said, and I can tell, I can relive it. I can see her face and I can hear her words, and says, hey, well, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to ask someone else, because I already addressed that, and as a fifth grader, that shut me off until I was in college. So where are your students' voices, right? You have to really, really unpack that. And I think that the power that you have as educators, it goes beyond your knowledge. So what we'd like to leave you with is really, what does student voice look like? Is it inclusive? Is it integrated? Is it transformative? And most of all, is it empowering? Because that, my friends, is the ultimate goal of student voice in classrooms, even if it's an elementary level.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ernestina. Thank you, Renee, for having us. We did a last one, our reflection. This is another thing that you can implement with your students. What are your ideas? How are you feeling? Or what are your next steps? Your students can choose one or all three. Another closing reflection that we would have loved to have given you an opportunity to do, but you can also implement this with your students. And I know we're up on time. Renee, thank you. Ernestina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was
fantastic.
fantastic. You got great feedback already, and thank you so much. That was really great. I'm looking forward to uploading this session, because I have a feeling we're gonna have a lot of people watching this.
Okay,
So,
all right.
Great job. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.